we're going to be talking about the Torah portions this week. It's a double Torah portion, the portion of Matos and Maseh. Is a portion that talks about the Lord making a vow, making a promise.
He's on at 5.
Mute everyone.
No, he wasn't. The other guy was on his 5.
Doesn't he only teach at 10?
Person has to mute.
Okay, I'm muting. Okay, I muted everyone, so that should work. Okay, so so I was mentioning that the Torah portion this week is a double portion. Matos talks about, it starts with the laws of vows and very interesting laws about a person prohibiting themselves with certain it actually could be food, it could be where they're going to go, it could be, person's house, it could be, you could prohibit on yourself. I'm not going to benefit from this, from that, from this person, from that community, from, you could make vows, all different types of vows that are actually valid. You actually create a prohibition on yourself. Very interesting laws where you prohibit certain things upon yourself. And there are also laws about who can annul the vow. In the Torah, it talks about the husband or the father annulling a vow of his wife or of his daughter. But interestingly enough, there's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. There's a tradition that a rabbi has the ability, and a rabbi that's an expert in these laws has the ability to annul a vow. So a person makes a vow and says they're going to fast every Thursday as an atonement. They want to fast or as a way of losing weight. And they make a vow, I'm not going to eat every Thursday. And food is prohibited upon me on Thursdays. If they say such a thing. And then they could annul that vow by going to either a rabbi that's an expert in these laws, or the other rule is that they could go to a group of 3, like a Bezdin, a court, a Jewish court, and that would be a way of annulling the vow. Now, the law of vows we're reading about, how does that fit in to the story of the Jewish people? We've been learning every week about where the Jewish people are. Having left Egypt, they've gone on a very long tour through the desert. So where are they holding now? In that place where they're holding, why are they now being taught the laws of making a vow? Wouldn't these laws be better if they were in the book of Leviticus, where it talks about the laws of sacrifices? A person promises to bring a sacrifice. I would think there would be a good place to put laws if a person vows. They're sort of like sacrificing of themselves. It's similar to a sacrifice. Or maybe in some of the books of law, the laws that are in the portion of Mishpatim, which is some of the laws at Sinai when we were given many of the laws, or I should say all the laws. So how does this fit in here? Where are they holding? Where are the Jewish people now standing that they're being taught these laws? So the Jewish people are about to enter the land of Israel, meaning it's at the end of Moses' life. We're at the end of the 40 years in the desert. That's where we are now. And let's try to think, why would they be given laws about vows when they're about to enter the land of Israel? what do vows have to do with the land of Israel? What is the connection? Wouldn't these same vows be applicable even in the desert or even in Egypt? What is unique? What is something what has come about? What change is happening that's causing us to want to know the laws of vows? And again, this doesn't say this is not the simple reading of the actual Torah, but I'm sharing with you insights from the later sages, and this is one of the questions that's asked: is how do the laws of vows fit in here? And any thoughts? Anyone want to share their Yes, Naomi.
Freedom, the will to choose.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, that they left Egypt, and they're no longer slaves, and therefore they have more freedom on their hands. And one of the elements of freedom is to prohibit. You could make your own prohibitions, so to speak. That's an interesting thought. Okay, thank you, Naomi. Yes, Natalie. You know what? You have to just press a button called the unmute button.
Oh, I got it. A sense of purity. They're going into a new land, and they want a list of things that will be accepted by Hashem.
So an element of purity, and the fact that this is making a vow. What I understood from you is making a vow is sort of like a way of a person wants to purify themselves by prohibiting certain things that may be unpure or impure or unclean, or maybe connected to something that's inappropriate, and they want to prohibit such things upon themselves. Is that what you meant, or what you're thinking?
Yeah, yes, because everything and anything happened in the desert with the Midianites and with other tribes, and they're going into a new land, and they want to dismiss all past mistakes and make this land better than what they've experienced thus far.
So that's a very, very good point. It's an element of making sure, protecting themselves really from certain challenges that come up in people's lives that cause us to sin and cause us to make wrong choices. And making a vow is a very powerful way of protecting oneself. And I really, we should talk about that for a moment. So let's think about this. A person knows they need to lose weight. So they make this vow that they're gonna, let's say, fast on Thursdays, or they're gonna not have any sugar. No foods that have no sugary foods. And so they make this vow that they're not gonna have that, that such items are prohibited to them. Now, how is that going to help them by making the vow? I mean, if they know they can't have it, so that they're not going to eat it. And what does the vow do that helps them, that helps protect them? Why do they need a vow? Why can't they just realize they need to go on a diet and stop eating these sugary foods or fast every Thursday? Why does the vow help them? So I'm just explaining a little about what you're saying, Natalie. But yes, tell us, what does it help?
It's a promise. It's a promise that I'm going to do better than I've done in the past.
So the promise, which is very good, very good. I'm glad you said this. It's a promise. The promise is what actually makes it work, because whenever you start a diet, most people, what happens is then they see something that they really want. So they say, oh, I was going to start the diet today, but you know what? Let's start it tomorrow. I'm starting it tomorrow. That's what normally happens. And then, of course, tomorrow they already forgot about it. There's no diet. They don't even remember that they thought about a diet. So normally the diet doesn't work. But when you make a promise, you're committed to, you have to follow through. You have to keep that. And so a vow is really an element of it's really an element of extra strength. It's giving you extra strength to keep that commitment by making that promise. So a promise is a very powerful thing. It's almost like a treaty, where you make a treaty with another entity, another person, a friend, a company, a country, and you make a treaty. What it really is doing is, in a certain sense, you could ask, what do I need it for? Because we both want peace. So what do we need the treaty? But it's more than that, because what happens when one of us does something that's a little out of line? If one of us does something that's a little out of line, so if we don't make a treaty, then you did something that's a little out of line. I'm going to now stop my interest in having this treaty and always caring for you, because because we sort of, it's reciprocal. If you're doing something out of line, I'm going to do. But if we make a treaty, then even if you do something that's out of line, the treaty commits me to keeping my side of it, and hopefully you will then realize that there's a treaty here, and we're supposed to keep up. Whether even if you do something that's a little wrong, I'm still obligated to keep my terms. Now, it doesn't always work that way. Of course, there have to be, when you make a treaty with an enemy, that type of treaty, you need to put clauses in. If you do this, I'm not keeping my side. But when you're making a treaty with a friend, normally the concept of making a treaty with a friend means that even if I like you so much, I care for you so much, that even if you do something that's a little out of line, I'm still committed to helping you, because we're such good friends. That would be like the ideal concept of a treaty, because people make mistakes here and there, but the concept of a treaty is to take effect. You see its effect. It expresses itself. The power of the treaty is expressed when one of us goes out of line. The power of the treaty kicks in, and that's the idea of a vow. Is the same thing, that when I'm able to control myself, I don't need the vow. But when it becomes hard to control myself my example is the diet. So in that case, that's when that promise, that vow kicks in and says, I can't transgress this. I know it looks really good. That brownie looks very enticing, but I can't have it because I made that promise. So the vow is a very powerful entity. In fact, if a person transgresses a vow, the Talmud says that the entire area of a whole, it gives a certain size of an area, shakes, like the world shakes, because of intrepidation of transgressing a vow. A vow is is considered a very important element that a person never wants to make a promise or a vow and falsely or transgress it. To the extent that even though a vow is not one of the 7 Noahide laws, we still expect non-Jews to keep their vows. And that's an interesting thing. In other words, there are 7 Noahide laws: not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to worship idols, not to curse God, to set up courts of justice. So there's 7, not to eat meat from live animals. There's 7 Noahide laws. But then there are a few concepts that are so universal that they don't even need to be mentioned. And one of them is a promise. And another one is honoring parents, believe it or not. That these would be other laws that are expected of the non-Jews as well, but even without being written, even without being part of the rules of the 7 Noahide laws. So coming back to the laws of vows. So we were talking about the fact that the Jewish people are being given these laws right before they enter the land of Israel. And the concept of having these laws would be to protect ourselves from sin. And, this sounds really, like a very important element or important rule to have added at this point. At the same time, there's an interesting Talmudic statement where the Talmud says that it's not enough what I prohibited from you, that you are making your own prohibitions. And that seems to run contrary to what we've just explained. In other words, there's the flip side of the coin. On the one hand, it sounds great. We've got to protect, the laws. And one of the ways protecting the laws is by making a vow, giving yourself that extra strength to control yourself. We all have our desires, and we, by making that promise, it gives us that extra push to keep to strengthen ourselves in whether it's in a way of controlling ourselves not to do something or to do something positive. But that extra strength it seems to be a very important part of fulfilling God's commandments. On the other hand, the Talmud says this totally different way of thinking, of the flip side of the coin, and that is that there is a concept of it's not enough what I prohibited in the Torah, that you're making your own prohibitions, to the extent that the Talmud mentions an idea that a person who makes a vow, it's as if he's building an altar as an alternative to the temple altar. It's like you're making your own thing, doing your own, running your own show. And if you fulfill your vow and don't annul it, it's as if you brought a sacrifice on your own altar. And we know, according to that building one's own altar in the time when altars were prohibited, when we were supposed to have the temple altar, that was considered a very serious crime. And so the Talmud does seem to have, on the one hand, there seems to be an important element of making vows. On the other hand, there seems to be a negative side to making vows. Now, the other interesting thing to mention, and we're going to come to that, we're going to come back to this contradiction shortly, but another important thing to think about is the concept of what did the spies who checked out the land of Israel, what did they do wrong? What mistake did they make? They wanted to stay in the desert, and they didn't want to go to the land of Israel. And the reason that they didn't want to go to the land of Israel, at least according to one of the popular explanations, is that the land of Israel involves a lot of materialism. It involves a lot of time to be spent on physical labor and materialistic things. And in the desert, we're able to concentrate on spirituality. And I'm sure you heard that as one of the interpretations of the sin of the spies and what their intent was. What really did they have in mind? And they had in mind something that you may say is positive. They wanted spirituality. They wanted holiness. They were enjoying having the manna in the desert. They were enjoying listening to lectures by none other than Moses himself, the recipient of all the Torah from God. He himself was giving the lectures, and they had a very spiritual time there. They didn't even have to go and make a living. They didn't have to go to work. So there was tremendous amount of spiritual growth that they enjoyed, and spiritual, it was like a utopia. It was a really spiritual enjoyment and pleasure. And the concept of Israel having to build roads, build houses, go to work, plant fields, plow, plant, water, harvest, prune, all the different works that were necessary. Even the food, they're just making food is something they didn't have to deal with. They didn't have to go buy clothing in the desert. They didn't, there was no issue of food. They had the manna. They had the clothing was automatically washed. They didn't have to do washes, no ironing. It was no hemming and ironing and going shopping. They didn't have any of that. So there really was a tremendous question of what's going to be with their spirituality. However, as brilliant as an idea that it sounds, that the spies chose that we want to stay in the desert, it was actually wrong and a terrible sin, because God wanted us to go to Israel. Sounds good, logically. The spies did have some good logic there, but logic sometimes is bad. It's wrong, evil. I'm sorry?
Weren't they fearful? Because God promised that wherever they traveled, and he would make sure that they would win against whatever tribe was there. And they were fearful of getting in a war again. And they made up all these stories about the giants. They were too big and they were too powerful to take over the land.
So you're right. A good point. Natalie is asking a challenging question that really, if you read the wording in the Torah, it sounds like their concern was not about the spiritual matters. It was more about the physical. They're nervous about losing the wars. And
but Hashem promised that they would never lose the war. They didn't have enough spiritual faith. They needed
more faith. The only problem is that it seems surprising to say that they didn't have faith, because they are the ones who saw. I mean, they were aware of all the miracles God did for them. And they were eating the manna. So how could they not have had faith? And they even, it definitely, they not only that, they saw the miracles in Egypt, So in order to explain, I mean, it's really a topic for the Torah portion Shlach, where it talks about the spies. But I will just mention that even though that's the way it sounds from the wording, but it's hard to explain it that way. So the way you need to explain it more that they felt that if we're going to be going to Israel, and the job in Israel is going to be all about the physical and material world, then maybe God is not going to be fighting our wars in a miraculous way. When we go to Israel, everything's going back to normal. And so you have to change the whole perspective. We're going to be going back to normal, and we're going to have to fight those wars, and it's going to involve our own physical might. And the actual wars maybe was one issue, but the deeper issue that they had to do with the entire concept of the physical versus the spiritual. So that's more or less the concept of explaining. Now, I mention this as a side point in order to now touch upon our Torah portion. That story of the spies, what do we learn from that story? The story we take from there is all about involving ourselves with the physical world around us and elevating it, refining it, utilizing it for holiness, making it spiritual, making it holy. And even though the spies would have liked to live this spiritual life, God said, you got it all wrong. It's not about the spiritual. It all boils down to the physical. You need to elevate the physical. That's what I need from you. I don't need you to do the spiritual. I need you to do the physical. I want you keeping Shabbos. I want you keeping the laws of kosher. I want you it's all about the physical. Spiritual, I have my angels. My angels in heaven, they do a good job, spiritual. Here on earth, I want you doing the physical stuff. I want you keeping, the laws of modesty, the laws, all the rules, the physical rules, materialistic laws that have to do with giving charity, everything that has to do with money, with clothing, with food, with houses, with plants, with work, all of these laws. That's what's important to me, and that's what I want you to do, and that's what you're going to Israel for. So your job is to elevate the entire world around you. Now let's take that concept into the laws of making a vow. When you take on a vow and say, this is prohibited to me, this field I can't benefit from, this, I'm prohibiting this from me. Everything we're making a vow from physical things in the world. Does that seem to fit with this new perspective that we have, that you're going to go to Israel and we need to elevate the world around us? We need to involve ourselves with materialism and elevate it. And so making a vow seems to be contrary to the lesson we learned from the spies. And that seems to be a major contradiction here between the lesson of the spies versus the laws of making vows. And the way to reconcile that is really based on 2 points. Number one number one, we are obligated not only to elevate the world around us, but we're supposed to refine and elevate and make holy our words, our mundane words that come out of our mouth are supposed to be used for holiness, for good purposes. We're supposed to use it for a mitzvah. We're not supposed to go around screaming at people and getting angry at people. We're supposed to be using our words to inspire people to talk positive and to give someone a compliment. That's what our words are for. And that really fits with our entering the land of Israel to elevate the world around us, is also involves using our speech. It's not just thinking, meditating, which maybe the spies were very into. They would have liked to just sit back and meditate on God and the greatness of God, which is good, but it's not what God wanted. Only God wants us to involve our speech in our action and involve the world around us. So if you take this concept of making a vow, on the one hand, it sounds like it's a contradiction to the concept of elevating the world around us. If you're making a vow, you're separating yourselves really from certain parts of the world, from certain elements in the world. So, for example, if you say you're never going to have sugar, what about Shabbos when you're supposed to have dessert? What about the 7-layer cake or the cheesecake for Shavuos, the balinzas? What are you going to do how are you going to fulfill the mitzvahs that are enhanced? I can't say is an obligation to have 7-layer cake on Shabbos, but it's enhanced. Shabbos is enhanced when you have some delicious cake. So how are you going to reconcile that with limiting yourselves and prohibiting these things from you? And the answer is, the first point, I guess you could say it's two answers. The first answer is that on the one hand, you're separating yourself from these important from parts of the world, but at the same time, you're elevating your speech. Because if you made a vow, you're keeping it. You're using your vow, you made a vow, and now you're making your words holy by keeping your vow. So maybe you shouldn't have done the vow in the first place, but the fact that you did the vow, you have a mitzvah to keep the vow as an element of entering the land of Israel and elevating your speech. So part of elevating the speech, of using your speech in making your speech holy, which really is a global concept of making everything you come in contact with holy. That idea is presented here as they're about to enter the land of Israel. We're told, if you make a vow, make sure your words are also holy. So everything you come in contact with should be holy. Your words as well should be holy. Now, the second answer is that what we're learning here is not only the laws of making a vow, but we're really learning the laws of annulling a vow. And that's the concept of annulling the vow before we enter the land of Israel. That the laws of annulling vows is what's really the uniqueness of these laws. That yes, it mentions the laws of vows, but because we need to connect with all of the physical and mundane matters that we have around us, the environment around us, anything that's available to us, we're supposed to be elevating and utilizing for holy purposes, making the world a dwelling place for God. So as we're about to enter the land of Israel, we are taught the laws of annulling vows, which is the concept of annulling the vow in order to be able to utilize whatever the vow was set upon, utilizing it now for a good purpose. That don't separate yourself from it. Annul the vow and now connect with that thing. So initially you made a vow that you're never going to go to that person's house. And now you're gonna go there and go to his house and befriend him and try to encourage him and try to motivate him, use it for a good purpose. So that is the two understandings of how the vow is really fits as we're about to enter the land of Israel. And what's interesting is that the annulment of vows is acceptable. Nowadays, we don't have it, but officially, if we would have an expert rabbi in vows, he would be allowed to annul our vows, just him. We don't need like 3 people. You don't need a court. That one person who's an expert in the laws of vows would be eligible to annul our vows. On a deeper level, what that means is that the concept of a vow, as we explained a little earlier and based a little on Natalie's explanation, was that we have to protect ourselves. We need to protect ourselves from certain elements that are around us that are creating a challenge, a desire, a lust, an enticement, for an attraction that we can't control ourselves from. But if we make the vow, this will help us control ourselves. Now, that sounds very good, and it's very important. But think about it. Is that the ideal state we want to be in? What is the ideal state that we should be? So for a beginner, or for someone who's on their path of becoming righteous, that is a very important part. You need to separate and protect yourself from certain things. When you reach righteousness, at that point, the equation changes. And at that point, it's now you're preventing the potential to elevate all of these situations. And you're not doing it. You're separating yourself from the world. Let me give you an example. Jacob had a daughter. Her name was Dinah. When Jacob met up with his brother Esau, what did he do? He hid Dinah. Why did he hide Dinah? He did what makes a lot of sense. He hid her because Esau was a murderer. He was a rapist. He was dangerous. He's his brother, but he's dangerous. And all he needs Esau to see is this beautiful daughter of his. And what's Esau going to say? She's mine. I want to marry her. Don't mix in. And he'll run off with her. So Jacob hid her. And, you know, if you ask me, it sounds logical. It sounds like he did the right thing. But God seemed to have a different understanding. And God said, you know, if Esau would have married Dinah, Dinah would have actually refined Esau and made him into a mensch. She would have beat him into shape. I don't know physically, but she would have made a mensch out of him. She wouldn't have served him supper unless he dressed a little more properly. And she wouldn't, she would have made sure that he acts like a mensch. You can't go like this. You can't do things like that. She would have screamed at him, given him a good speech that, only she knows how to do. And she would have been able to influence him in a positive way. And therefore, it was considered wrong on Jacob's part. In other words, Jacob should have understood the power that Dinah had, the ability, the influence that she could have had if this would have ended up taking place, that Esav would have wanted to marry Dinah. So of course, on our level, maybe it's hard to relate to, but that is something that's mentioned in the commentaries of the Torah and in the insights of the rabbis, of the scholars of the Talmud. And so, coming back to our situation, I mentioned earlier that there's two sides to the coin. On the one hand, we tell you that it's good to make a vow because you're preventing yourself from sinning. On the other hand, we're telling you that, you know what, making a vow, it's not enough. What God prohibited, you're going to go prohibit yourself from more things? And then the same question we asked from the story of the spies, that you're not supposed to be separating yourself from the physical world. You're supposed to be in the physical world and elevating it. What are you doing? Separating yourself from physical things, from materialism. That's not our job. You should live in a nice house. Use it for good things. You don't have to buy a small hut. Buy a nice house. Materialism? That's not materialism. I'm buying a nice house because I'm going to have guests. I'm going to offer my house as a communal location if they want to do an event. We're going to have a wedding at my house. We're going to have good things, mitzvahs being done in my house. When they write a Torah scroll, they're going to finish it in my house to bring it to the synagogue. My house will be used for good things. We don't have to limit ourselves from the physical material world. No, we're going to have steak and brisket and spare ribs and all these fancy cuts of meat and smoked meats and so on. And we're going to have it for Shabbos to honor the Shabbos. I'm not I'm not limiting myself, preventing myself from the materialism. We're using material, but for good purposes, not to indulge, not to, we don't have to, be crazy overweight, but we can, we can use it for good purposes, for Shabbos, for Yontiv, for holidays, and so on, for mitzvahs. Now, so how do you reconcile these two sides of the coin? And the answer is that it depends on where you're holding. Are you in the beginning or intermediate stages of heading towards righteousness, or have you reached a level where you're already there? You're a righteous individual. If you're righteous already, you don't need to protect yourself because you have control. You've proven yourself with self-control so many times already that you've reached a level where it's not an issue. You don't need to prevent yourself from materialism. You can handle materialism. It's not a challenge to you anymore. Certain people have reached that. For example, some people, if you offer them a steak from a non-kosher restaurant, they have zero desire for that steak. If you offer them an ice cream from a non-kosher ice cream source with all the dips and everything on top of it and all the coverings and who knows whatever they add, the additional stuff they add on, there's no desire because you keep kosher. You've kept kosher for so many years. You don't have a desire for that. You don't need to make a vow against such a thing. You're not going to end up eating it. And the same thing applies to other types of situations where you don't need to take on those preventative measures. On the other hand, someone who maybe has become kosher at a later stage in their life, they do need to take on a vow because they need that as a preventative measure. So it depends on the person and depends on the situation that they're in. It depends on the item that they're taking a vow from. So there are some things that they can relate to. If you hang out with a certain friend, they're going to drag you into the drugs that they take. But if you hang out with another friend, you're going to drag her to the synagogue. So it depends on who. For that person, you should make a vow. I'm not hanging out with. But the other person, you don't make a vow that you're not going to hang out with that person because that would be the greatest thing if you hung out with that person. Yes, they're less religious than you are. Yes, they do things that you would never do. In their languages, they speak a different type of language. They have words that you would never say. but you're going to be the one to influence that person. You're able to influence. You're not going to be pulled from that person. She's not her way of life doesn't attract you at all. So such a person, you don't want to limit yourself from. You want to invite that person over so you can teach that person how to change, how to become a better, more refined individual. So that's where these two sides of the coin fit in. So some people need to have the vow, and for other people or other situations, the vow is not only unnecessary, it's wrong, because you're not allowing Esau to be to change and to be elevated. So that's where these two parts of the coin, these two ideas, how they work, how they are both appropriate, and it really depends on the person, the place, the thing, the item, the situation. It really depends on all of these matters. So sometimes a vow is necessary, sometimes it's unnecessary, and when it's unnecessary, it's not allowed. If it's unnecessary, it should not be done. If it's necessary, it's a good thing, but you got to be careful and realize that there's a very serious consequences if someone transgresses a vow. And that's why when a Jewish person goes to court, we generally say, I affirm, and you don't say I vow, I swear, because to swear is not appropriate in Jewish law. It's a very dangerous and delicate, fragile situation, type of a act. It's a very dangerous act. But to affirm, yes, we say the truth and we don't lie. But to swear is a very delicate thing, and we don't take it lightly. And that basically takes us to this Torah portion where we have the concept of taking on a vow and annulling a vow. In the final point that I was leading up to is this, that there's a law that an expert can annul the vow. What's the real concept of annulling the vow? Annulling the vow, if you want to connect all the dots and everything that I've said today, annulling the vow is the pinnacle of what our goal is to reach. That the expert, the rabbi who's the expert, his job is not just in the physical sense, he's annulling the vow for you. He's elevating you to a level that you don't need that vow anymore. He's the one who's inspiring you that don't be affected by that type of enticement. That shouldn't entice you. That's below your dignity. That's not something that's enticing. That's disgusting. That's a situation. He's elevating us. So on the physical level, on the surface level, the expert in the rabbinic expert in the laws of vows, he's annulling the vow for you. That's a surface level. The deeper point is he's not annulling the vow for you. He's annulling your need to have such a vow, and of course he's annulling it, but he's elevating you to a level where you don't need that vow. That's really what he's doing on a deeper level. So that's the concept of annulling the vow that we're supposed to reach. In other words, that's the ultimate, is to really annul the vows that we have, because we should be on a level that we aren't interested. It's not enticing. We are able to control ourselves from those challenges. And on the contrary, we can actually inspire the person who we thought would end up pulling us down. We could actually pull him up. And that's where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be on a level that we're strong enough, we're solid enough to be able to elevate others. And that really is the meaning of the word Matos, which is the name of the first Torah portion. Matos means a stick. And there's two words for stick. There's shevet and mata. Mata is a stick that is dry. It's a dry stick, detached from any source of nourishment. A shevet is a branch that's either still attached or it's moist. It's still moist. And the concept of the mata is that it's much stronger. The shevet is more flexible. The mata is solid. And that's how we are meant to be, reach a level where our Judaism is solid. And we are solid people that we're not going to be influenced by others. Instead, we are the ones that influence we influence others instead of them influencing us. And so that really, I think, summarizes this concept of how the Torah portion begins, and gives us a good inspiration of how we're supposed to be. And I should just conclude with the concept of the idea that you find that why are Lubavitch rabbis in all these countries where no other Jews have chosen to settle, but Chabad rabbis will go there and establish their house in their, they'll move to a place where there's no infrastructure for Jewish life. Why is that? And the answer is because the rest of the very religious world is too nervous.
You're frozen.
What's
You're-
the answer? You're frozen.
You're frozen, Rabbi. I'm going to add something, even though he's frozen.
Yes.
We just read about Pincus, and it talked about the immorality of the people at that time. And because of the immorality, God put a plague on the whole area, and people died from that plague until Pincus killed the two immoral people that he saw doing something immoral. There is the rabbi. Rabbi, you were
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So, yeah, I know. You know what happened is my phone heated up and it died because it was so hot.
Oh,
I didn't realize I was such a powerful speaker that the energy just affected the phone. But in any event, let me just conclude. I know I went over time, so I'm just going to take one more minute of your time and conclude. And that
Yes.
is,
We need the
So-
answer. We
Yeah,
need
so
an answer.
you want the answer. So the answer is that the rest of the world is very nervous that if they go to a community where there's no infrastructure, they will be pulled down to the level of the community to some extent, and they will lose their Judaism, or to some extent they will stop doing certain things because they'll be so affected by the community around them that there's no infrastructure, and they won't have the strength. They're nervous that they're going to lose their strength. They need to be in an infrastructure to keep them strong. Chabad is unique. We have a Rebbe. In being very connected to the Rebbe gives us that strength that
yes.
we would need to be able to open up a community, to start a community, even in a place where there's no infrastructure. Instead, not only are we not going to be pulled down from those elements in the community, but we will lift up the community and make that community a community that's vibrant and thriving with Yiddishkeit. So that really is puts this whole idea into perspective in today's day and in today's age. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this class.
Rabbi, I have one thing to add. I was just saying this, that the former Parsha that we read about Pincus, God, Hashem, was so displeased with the community for immorality, that he gave a plague where thousands of people died. And once Pincus took care of the so-called problem, the plague disappeared and people were brought back. And the cause of the vows to go into Israel, that was one of the reasons that they wanted people to be more holy, going into a new land, going into Israel. And that's why they needed the vows, so they wouldn't have that immorality that they were experiencing.
Exactly. And you know what that really means is that the issue with Pinchas was that the people, they were framed and they fell into this sin of immorality, not because they wanted to, but they ended up doing one thing led to another. They ended up looking for clothing, and the person who was selling the clothing was not dressed properly, and that led to the immorality. One thing led to the other. And the concept is we have to be careful of what we look at. We have to be careful of what we see. What do we put our eyes in? This applies especially to like TV shows and internet things, that people look at things that are inappropriate and they don't realize how it affects them, and they become, one thing leads to another and they end up losing themselves. It's a very dangerous thing we have out there, and it's right in front of our eyes. So that's a very important thing. And
It's
also the
right
idea
in our hand. People walk around with their cell phone like it's an appendage, and they can't live without it. And that's the danger.
It's a very big danger, very scary. Anyway, sei gesund, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful day and a good Shabbos.
Good
Thank you,
job,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Bye,
You're welcome.
Natalie.
Bye. Bye, Naomi.